It's a really interesting dynamic when we think about apprenticeships and how we deal with the trades, is there's a model that works but then doesn't work. Hi, it's Jamie from Evolution 5. In today's video, we're going to talk about a couple of issues that we face in the construction industry. Earlier this week, I posted on LinkedIn a question, and the question was, if there's one thing in construction you would change, what would it be? And really interestingly, I've had a lot of engagement on LinkedIn through various people raising issues, and we've gone back and forwards debating the issues, and I think it would be really great in today's video to talk about them. So the first issue was raised by Richard Browning, who is owner of Hampshire Living Group. Richard raised the issue of collaboration in all sense of the words. And what Richard was trying to get at is, in the construction industry, we don't really work as collaboratively as we should do. And we find that there's a lot of adversarial relationships. And normally they stem by the contractual relationship. If we take, for example, the employer and the contractor. So we explored some of the issues in terms of collaboration, and obviously there's a bit of a dialogue going back and forwards on LinkedIn. And we talked about, firstly, the Latham Report, which was produced in 1994, called Constructing the Team. And then we went on to the Egan Report that followed up in 1998. Which was Rethinking Construction. And I think there's a general consensus. There was lots of recommendations from those two reports. There was a lot of focus on building relationships and collaboration. But really, the industry hasn't really taken a lot of those recommendations on board, or even where they haven't really done it in, what am I trying to say, the real sort of true sense of what was meant by those recommendations. So sort of taking that a bit further and using an example, in the Egan Report, one of the things that was recommended was around moving away or looking at alternatives to competitive tendering. And here we are 27 years later, and you've probably seen a lot of my previous videos on this topic around competitive tendering, but here we are 27 years later, and we're still having to competitively tender construction projects to put bread on the table. So if we look at some of the issues we face in construction that don't really foster collaboration, we still have heavily amended construction contracts that shift the risk from the employer to the contractor. We're not really looking at pain gain mechanisms that can incentivize the contractor. We also have issues with payments. You know, even after all these years and the Construction Act, we still have issues with contractors not getting paid on time, subcontractors not getting paid on time. So we still have very, very many issues in construction where the two parties are not joined up. The contract, the payments create adversarial issues. And none of these are really healthy in creating an environment for collaboration. At Evolution 5, we have lots of instances where we're called in by clients or contractors at a point which they've got into an issue with one another, there's a dispute. And the issue with there is whilst we will come in and we do the job that we're paid to do, which is usually at that stage where it's too late, putting the best case forward for that party that's employing us, in real terms, it's all too late. You know, collaboration needs to happen right at the outset of a project. I mean, when we talk about contracting and the contractual mechanisms, take, for example, the JCT project partnering contract. I mean, that's been out now for a really, really long time. And in real terms, how many people have actually used it? And probably moreover, how many people even know it exists? So, you know, there's some real fundamental issues we have in construction that don't really foster, the word I keep using, collaboration. So why don't we just have a look at a couple of things that we can do on projects to enable good collaboration amongst the project team. So number one, the first thing we can do, and as I said just a minute ago, is at the outset is to procure the project in the right way. So we've got to have in mind right from the outset how we want to set the project up and how we want to work with the project team, members, stakeholders, the like. So when we talk about procurement, firstly, we're talking about how we actually go into purchase, if that's the right word, the services and the supplies for the project. So let's just stick to the employer and the contractor, so how we procure in that contractor. So we also talked just a minute ago about competitive tendering. So, we could look at things like negotiation, for argument's sake. And then also, once we've negotiated the terms, it's around the contract terms as well. So we talked about the JCT project partnering contract. The NEC 4 also fosters a collaborative approach, and I'm sure there's other contracts out there that can be considered. So procurement in how we take on the contractor, but also the contract between the two parties. So tip 2 is around communication planning. So making sure at the outset of a project, we have a communication plan in place. We take the benefit or use the benefit of technology to enable and improve communications, but at least not forgetting that face-to-face communication is the most effective and the best in terms of developing relationships. And tip 3 is around strong leadership. So let's take the project manager on a project. It's making sure if you're an employee, you've got the right person that can create an environment or a culture for collaboration. They're a good, strong leader. So it's around good selection of a project manager to lead the construction team to deliver a successful project. So the second issue we were discussing on LinkedIn came from Mike Smith, who's the Associate Director, Earl Kendrick. We all know Mike from the previous videos. Mike's a very good friend of mine, and he's a good advocate of the channel and also of Evolution 5. So Mike raised the issue. I'd like to see Tier 1 contractors employ tradespeople who have proper apprenticeships of at least 5 years. He also mentions that trades that will take care and pride in the work they carry out, which is, really important, but also something that's sorely lacked in the industry. Gavin McCullum, who is a contracts manager at Advanced Building Contractors, also raised the same point as Mike. So let's just get into the subject or the issue of apprenticeships in construction. So in the 27 years I've worked in construction, I've seen a real sort of decline, not just in the quality of apprenticeships, but also in the uptake. When I started out in my career, I started with Tarmac Construction, and they employed a lot of tradespersons. So they had bricklayers, carpenters, decorators, and they were all on the books. And over the sort of 27 years I've worked in the industry, you've seen a real decline of those sort of tier 1 contractors directly employing the labour force, the trades, if you like. For those who've worked in construction for a while, you may remember a company called ROK. They were a really good company. They sort of when I say come out of nowhere, but they almost exploded in the industry. And what made them successful, but it was also their downfall, was they actually employed directly their not the whole, specialist subcontractors, but generally throughout the sort of what we now know as subcontractors, the whole sort of trade force. And unfortunately, that was, as I said, that was their downfall. So that's one of the reasons they ended up being unsuccessful, as well as being successful during the time that they were operating. So it's quite interesting, really, when you think about it. There's a model for employing people, and developing apprenticeships and developing experience and specialisms within a company. But the model we have in the construction industry is such that it's really hard to sustain that labour force. So it's a really interesting dynamic when we think about apprenticeships and how we deal with the trades. Is there's a model that works but then doesn't work, and I think we just naturally all default back to the sort of subcontractors, and you can see why, because you use subcontractors when you need the supply, and when you don't need the supply you don't have that overhead. So it's a real interesting sort of quandary, if you like. So let's look at 3 quick tips when considering construction apprenticeships. So number 1, there needs to be better support, whether that's by the CITB, or by the employer or by both, and guidance to apprentices throughout their training to improve the retention issue that we previously mentioned. Tip 2 is the CITB and other leading construction bodies, so not just the CITB, need to better promote apprenticeships and careers in construction by highlighting the benefits of construction apprenticeships, career progression and opportunities for advancement. So lastly, tip 3 is around employers, whether that's the client or main contractor, for example, setting minimum standards from their supply chain. So whether that's the suppliers or subcontractors, to prevent inexperienced and unqualified people working on projects, which leads to quality issues, which is a whole different video. But also what it does is it adds value to apprenticeships, to qualifications and certification. So just to close this video, I'd like to just shout out a few other people who contributed to the LinkedIn discussion, but obviously we didn't have time to raise those issues in the video today. So I'd like to thank Mike Frowler, who I know, who's an architect and design manager at Part B, and also Henry Lamb, who's owner and director of Lamb and Partners, who I also know through the CIOB. Thanks a lot for contributing to our LinkedIn discussion. So I hope you found value in this video. If you have any questions or would like to discuss the issues that we've raised today, please reach out and I really look forward to hearing from you.